The date is December 22nd, 2025, and on a quiet street in Moscow, a Russian general climbs into his car just like he's done 1,000 times before. But in exactly 3 seconds, an explosion will rip through the morning air, sending shockwaves not just through the Russian capital, but straight into the heart of Putin's inner circle. This is the third high-ranking general killed on Russian soil in just 12 months. And here's what they're not telling you about how Ukraine is systematically dismantling the Kremlin's military leadership from the inside out. Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov never saw it coming. The head of Russia's Operational Training Directorate was walking toward his Kia Sorento on Yaseneva Street when someone somewhere pressed a button. The explosive device planted underneath his vehicle detonated with surgical precision. Sarvarov died instantly. His death wasn't an accident, it wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't the first time Ukraine has reached deep into the Russian capital to eliminate Putin's top brass. But here's the catch. This story doesn't start in December 2025. To understand what's really happening, we need to rewind exactly 1 year earlier to December 17th, 2024. That's when Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, the head of Russia's Radiological, Chemical, and Biological Protection Forces, stepped out of his apartment building in Moscow. He was walking with his assistant when an explosive device hidden inside an electric scooter parked outside detonated remotely. Both men were killed instantly. Ukrainian security services later claimed responsibility, and within hours they revealed why. Kirillov had been charged in absentia by Ukrainian authorities for the use of chemical weapons against Ukrainian troops. The United Kingdom had sanctioned him just 2 months earlier in October for what they called the deployment of barbaric chemical weapons in Ukraine. This wasn't just an assassination, it was an execution. Now think about this for a second. Ukraine successfully infiltrated Moscow, planted a bomb in a scooter, conducted surveillance on a top general's movements, and executed him less than 24 hours after charging him with war crimes. That level of operational sophistication doesn't happen by accident. It requires assets on the ground, precise intelligence, and nerves of steel. And they didn't stop there. Fast forward to April 25th, 2025. Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik, age 59, is driving near Moscow when his car explodes. Another car bomb, another dead general, another Ukrainian operation successfully executed on Russian soil. That's 3 generals in 12 months, all killed in Moscow or its suburbs, all victims of what intelligence analysts are now calling the most aggressive targeted assassination campaign in modern warfare. But here's what makes this absolutely terrifying if you're sitting in the Kremlin. These aren't battlefield casualties. These aren't generals killed by artillery strikes in Ukraine. These are precision hits carried out in the Russian capital, in supposedly secure areas, against individuals who should have had layers of protection around them. We're talking about men who worked directly with Putin's military machine, who had security details, who knew they were targets. And yet, Ukraine's security service, the SBU, reached them anyway. Let's talk about the methods for a minute, because this is where it gets really interesting. The Kirillov assassination used an electric scooter bomb triggered remotely, which means someone was watching, probably through a live camera feed, waiting for the exact right moment. The Sarvarov killing involved an explosive device planted underneath his personal vehicle, which means operatives had physical access to his car, likely in a secured parking area. These aren't crude IEDs thrown together in a basement. We're talking about sophisticated explosive devices, probably containing between 0.5 kilogram to 2 kilograms of military-grade explosives designed to cause maximum damage to a specific target while minimizing collateral casualties. Russian investigators opened murder probes after both the Sarvarov and Moskalik killings, stating they were pursuing various motives, but specifically mentioning that Ukrainian special services were the primary theory. And you know what's fascinating? They're not even pretending anymore. Ukraine has openly claimed responsibility for several of these operations. The SBU released statements taking credit for Kirillov's death, explaining in detail why he was targeted. They're not hiding in the shadows. They're broadcasting their capabilities to the world, and more importantly, to Moscow. This changes everything when it comes to how we understand this war. For the first 3 years of the conflict, we saw a fairly traditional ground war. Armies clashing on battlefields, artillery exchanges, tank battles, drone warfare. But somewhere around late 2024, Ukraine shifted strategy. They realized something crucial. Yes, you can fight Russian soldiers in trenches, but why not go after the people giving them orders? Why not target the generals who plan chemical weapons attacks, who oversee training operations, who coordinate battlefield strategy? And here's the brilliant part. When you kill a general in Moscow, you're not just eliminating a military target. You're sending a message that nowhere is safe. Think about the psychological impact of this. If you're a Russian general right now, you're looking over your shoulder every single day. You're checking under your car before you start it. You're wondering if that electric scooter parked on your street is just a scooter or if it's the last thing you'll ever see. You're questioning whether your driver might be compromised, whether your security detail has been infiltrated, whether that maintenance worker who accessed your parking garage last week was actually who he said he was. This is asymmetric warfare at its finest, and it's absolutely devastating for morale. Russian state media has been trying to downplay these incidents, but internal military reports paint a very different picture. According to sources cited by the Kyiv Independent, pro-Kremlin officials are privately expressing serious concerns about what they call catastrophic security architecture failures. One unnamed Russian military analyst told reporters that every successful assassination represents not just the loss of a general, but a complete failure of protective systems that should have prevented these operations. Think about that. Russia is essentially admitting they can't protect their own generals in their own capital city. Now let's talk numbers, because they matter. As of December 2025, Russian sources have officially confirmed 13 generals killed during the war. But here's where it gets murky. Ukrainian military intelligence claims the number is significantly higher, potentially up to 19 generals eliminated through various means. The discrepancy exists because Russia doesn't always acknowledge deaths publicly, especially when they're embarrassing. But whether it's 13 or 19, we're talking about an unprecedented decapitation of military leadership. For context, the Soviet Union lost approximately 80 generals during the entire 10 years of the Afghanistan war. We're approaching a quarter of that number in less than 4 years in Ukraine, and we're only counting confirmed kills. The implications of this go way beyond individual assassinations. When you systematically eliminate senior military leadership, you create chaos in command structures. Junior officers suddenly find themselves promoted into positions they're not prepared for. Institutional knowledge disappears. Battle plans get disrupted. And perhaps most importantly, everyone below that general starts wondering if they're next. Military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War have noted that these targeted killings are having measurable effects on Russian operational effectiveness, particularly in areas where assassinated generals had specific expertise. Take Kirillov, for example. He was the chief of Russia's nuclear, biological, and chemical protection forces. His expertise in chemical warfare was presumably significant, which is exactly why Ukraine targeted him. When you eliminate someone with that level of specialized knowledge, you can't just plug in a replacement the next day and expect the same level of competence. Skills developed over decades of military service don't transfer instantly. And while Russia is scrambling to fill these positions, Ukraine is exploiting the confusion. But let's zoom out even further, because this isn't just about individual operations. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in how modern warfare is conducted. Ukraine is waging what intelligence analysts call a shadow war, a conflict that extends far beyond traditional battlefields into the heart of enemy territory. The SBU and Ukrainian military intelligence have transformed themselves from reactive defensive organizations into proactive offensive forces capable of striking anywhere. And here's what mainstream media isn't covering enough. These assassination operations are just one component of a much larger Ukrainian campaign inside Russia. Throughout 2025, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces have conducted drone strikes on oil refineries, sabotage operations against railways, attacks on military bases, and even strikes against Russia's so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers operating in international waters. In December 2025 alone, Ukraine claimed responsibility for hitting a Russian tanker in the Mediterranean Sea, marking the first time they've struck that far from Ukrainian territory. They're not just fighting for their homeland anymore. They're taking the war to Putin on every front imaginable. The Russian response has been predictable but revealing. After each assassination, Kremlin officials promise investigations and retaliation. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova called the Kirillov killing an act of terrorism and vowed that those responsible would face consequences. But here's the thing, the consequences haven't materialized in any meaningful way. Ukraine keeps operating, keeps striking, keeps eliminating targets. The threats ring increasingly hollow when you can't stop the next operation. Meanwhile, Western intelligence agencies are watching all of this with intense interest. According to reporting from multiple sources, U.S. intelligence officials have concluded that while they didn't have advanced knowledge of specific operations like the Kirillov assassination, they assessed that Ukraine was not attempting to assassinate Putin himself, which is an interesting distinction. Translation? Western allies are comfortable with Ukraine targeting military figures involved in war crimes, but draw the line at regime decapitation. That's a fine line to walk, and it tells you everything about the complex diplomatic dance happening behind the scenes. Now, there's another angle here that deserves attention. Russia has its own history of targeted killings and assassinations, both domestic and international. From the Salisbury poisonings in the UK involving former spy Sergei Skripal to numerous suspicious deaths of Putin critics over the years, Moscow has long used assassination as a tool of statecraft. What's different now is that Ukraine has turned the tables and developed capabilities that rival or exceed Russia's in this domain. The hunter has become the hunted, and the Kremlin doesn't quite know how to respond. Some military experts I've been following are calling this the most significant intelligence penetration of Russia since the Cold War. Think about what has to happen for these operations to succeed. Ukraine needs human intelligence assets in Moscow, people who can conduct surveillance, plant devices, and exfiltrate without being caught. They need signals intelligence to track targets' movements and communications. They need bomb-making expertise and supply chains to get explosives into Russia. They need operational security so tight that despite conducting multiple high-profile killings, they haven't had major operational failures or exposures. That level of capability took years to build, and it's only getting stronger. Here's where this gets really concerning for Moscow. Each successful operation likely emboldens Ukraine to attempt more ambitious targets. We've seen an escalation pattern. First, it was generals in Ukraine and border regions, then generals in Moscow, then the shadow fleet in international waters. What's next? How far will Ukraine push this? And more importantly, how far will their Western backers allow them to push? Because make no mistake, operations of this sophistication almost certainly involve some level of Western intelligence cooperation, even if it's just shared intelligence or training rather than direct operational involvement. The morale impact inside the Russian military cannot be overstated. Soldiers at the front are already dealing with horrific casualty rates. Estimates suggest Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties, including somewhere between 200,000 to 480,000 killed, since the invasion began in February 2022. Those are World War-level numbers compressed into less than 4 years. Now add the knowledge that even if you rise to the rank of general, even if you make it out of the battlefield, you're still not safe. Ukraine can reach you in Moscow. That's psychologically devastating. Russian military analysts quoted in various reports have noted unprecedented desertion rates and failures to follow orders. When internal Russian military documents list failure to follow orders among official causes of death for service members, you know there's a serious problem with command authority and morale. Dead generals compound this issue exponentially. If your commanding general gets assassinated, who do you trust? Who's in charge? What happens to the operational plans? The institutional chaos this creates is perhaps even more valuable than the elimination of the individual. Let's talk about the technical side for a moment because it matters. The bomb that killed Sarvarov was placed under his vehicle, which requires several things. First, physical access to the car, likely multiple times to conduct reconnaissance and then plant the device. Second, detailed knowledge of his schedule and routines. Third, a remote detonation system that works reliably. Fourth, operational security to avoid detection during planting and activation. Each of these steps has multiple points of potential failure. The fact that Ukraine is executing these operations successfully and repeatedly suggests an extremely sophisticated operational apparatus. Compare that to the Kirillov operation. Using an electric scooter as a delivery mechanism is ingenious because scooters are everywhere in Moscow. They blend in perfectly. Park one outside an apartment building and nobody thinks twice about it. But hiding a bomb inside one that's powerful enough to kill but controlled enough not to cause massive collateral damage requires serious technical skill. Then you need visual confirmation, probably through a hidden camera or a human spotter, to trigger it at the exact right moment. The precision involved is remarkable. What's particularly interesting is the choice of targets. Ukraine isn't going after random generals. They're selecting specific individuals based on their crimes and their strategic importance. Kirillov oversaw chemical weapons use. Sarvarov ran operational training, meaning he was responsible for preparing Russian forces for combat. Moskalik's specific role has been less publicized, but he was clearly significant enough to warrant targeting. This isn't indiscriminate, it's calculated and strategic. Ukraine is systematically dismantling the expertise and leadership that makes the Russian military effective. Now, here's something that should terrify anyone in Putin's inner circle. If Ukraine can reach generals, who else can they reach? We're talking about a security breach so profound that it raises questions about the entire protective apparatus around Russian leadership. How many Ukrainian assets are currently operating in Moscow? How deep has the penetration gone? Are there people inside the FSB or other security services feeding information to Kiev? These are questions that must be keeping people in the Kremlin awake at night. The geopolitical ramifications extend globally. Other nations watching this conflict are taking notes. We're seeing a demonstration of what modern covert operations can achieve when combined with Western intelligence cooperation and cutting-edge technology. Future conflicts will inevitably feature similar tactics. The playbook Ukraine is writing right now will be studied in military academies for decades. They've shown that a country fighting a defensive war against a much larger adversary can still project power deep into enemy territory in ways that change the strategic calculus. There's also an economic angle here that doesn't get enough attention. Every time a general gets killed, Russia has to increase security measures. More bodyguards, more armored vehicles, more surveillance equipment, more counterintelligence operations. All of that costs money and diverts resources away from the war effort. Ukraine is essentially forcing Russia to spend heavily on internal security, money that could otherwise go to tanks or missiles. It's economically asymmetric warfare. Looking ahead to 2026, the question isn't whether Ukraine will continue these operations. The question is how much further they'll escalate. We've already seen them hit targets in Moscow and in international waters. Will they start targeting generals in St. Petersburg? Will they go after civilian officials involved in the war effort? Will they attempt strikes on military production facilities or research centers? The trajectory suggests an expansion of both scale and ambition. Russia's ability to counter this is questionable at best. They've arrested suspects in some cases, like the Uzbek national detained after the Kirillov killing, but arrests after the fact don't prevent future operations. They'd need to fundamentally overhaul their security architecture, root out any Ukrainian intelligence networks, and somehow restore confidence among their military leadership. That's a monumental task that takes years, and Ukraine isn't giving them years. This is the new reality of warfare in the 21st century. It's not just about who controls territory or who has more tanks. It's about who can project power in unconventional ways, who can strike where and when they choose, and who can keep their adversary constantly off balance. Ukraine has mastered this art while simultaneously fighting a conventional war on their own territory. That's unprecedented. So what does all this mean for the average person watching from the United States, the UK, Canada, or Australia? It means the war in Ukraine is far more complex and far more consequential than most headlines suggest. It means we're witnessing the birth of new warfare doctrines that will shape conflicts for generations. It means the assumptions we held about how wars are fought between nation-states are being rewritten in real time. And it means that small, determined forces with the right capabilities can challenge even the largest militaries in ways that were unthinkable a generation ago. Putin's inner circle is not just shattered, it's under siege. 3 generals dead in 12 months in Moscow itself, more likely targeted even as we speak. A security apparatus that's proven incapable of stopping determined Ukrainian operatives. And a military leadership that now understands that rank and position offer no protection from precision strikes that can come anytime, anywhere. The implications of this will reverberate for years. Future historians will look back at this period and recognize it as the moment warfare fundamentally changed, when the line between front line and rear area dissolved completely, when no target was truly safe regardless of location. Ukraine didn't just kill 3 generals. They killed the illusion of security that allowed Putin's regime to function without constant fear, and that might be the most significant casualty of all. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and understand that the war you're seeing on television is only a fraction of the war actually being fought. The shadow war, the intelligence war, the assassination war, that's where the real action is. That's where Ukraine is systematically taking apart Putin's military machine, one carefully targeted operation at a time. And if you think this story is over, you haven't been paying attention. This is just the beginning.